Okay, so Google is releasing Gemini 3.5 Flash today, and this is a bigger deal than most people realize. This is the first Gemini model that is going GA at release in a while. That means you will be able to use this model in production starting today. This hasn't happened before. Also, this gives you 3.1 Pro preview level performance at the cost of a Flash model. Now, the price has increased. However, Flash plays a very critical role when it comes to Google's Gemini AI strategy. This is what we would call a workhorse model, a model that does most of the work in an agentic workflow. And data actually shows this. There's a recent study from Whryte that shows that Gemini 3 Flash is one of the most widely used model for agentic workflows. Data from OpenRouter also shows that the Flash models are one of the most widely used models that are powering agentic systems in production environments. So when Google releases a Flash model, you have to pay attention to it, especially with this one, because it gives you the pro level performance based on my own tests. Now, Google DeepMind was kind enough to give me early access, so I have been playing around with the model for quite a while. In this video, I'm going to be showing you some of the examples and test cases. At the time of the recording of this video, I don't have access to the benchmarks. So this video is going to be mostly based on my own experience without being biased by what the benchmark says. So let's have a look at all the tests that I was able to run. I will see you on the other side. So according to GDM, this model is really good at agentic coding. And I wanted to see how good this is going to be at building complex project that goes beyond a single short implementation. So this is a project that I saw on X where they're building an airflow simulator for Jetstream. Now, there are a number of different implementations of this, or at least tweets about it. So the one that I'm using is this. They initially used Image 2 model from OpenAI and then used Gemini 3.1 Pro to create this simulation. But in my case, I took that video, put it into a language model and generated a text description of this. And this is what I used to create the version that you are seeing right now. Now, this was built using the build feature within AI Studio. So it's not a single shot implementation. It's actually a lot more complex with a multi-agent setup, which is powered by Google Anti-Gravity. And the result actually is pretty good. Normally, the demos that you're going to see for these new models are usually single shot prompts, but the actual use is going to be a lot more complex. So these single shot prompts are not going to be good representative of what the model is actually capable of. And that's kind of what I wanted to explore with this specific project, because it is very complex with a lot of different moving parts. Now, the rest of the prompts that I'm going to be testing are going to be single shot, because usually if I were to implement something like this for every test, that's going to take a lot of time. But here's how this whole setup works. You can do or set up the throttle settings for the project, right? And this is actually going to show you the corresponding changes in the simulation. So it can build and simulate pretty complex systems. And that's kind of the beauty of this model, because it is able to give you frontier level performance at a relatively lower cost. In the rest of the video, I want to show you a direct comparison between this new Flash 3.5 model and also a 3.1 Pro preview. But we're going to start off with a quick comparison of a 3 Flash preview. Okay, so this model is very different from the general Flash model that Google have released so far. So to show you, let's run a live test. In this case, I want it to create an animation of a crowd of people walking to form "Hello World, I'm Gemini." And we want it to use 3.js. On the left-hand side, we have Gemini 3 Flash preview. On the right-hand side, we have Gemini 3.5 Flash. The very first thing that you're going to notice is that Gemini 3.5 Flash is very slow compared to Gemini 3 Flash preview. Now, this could be attributed to that I'm testing it in early access, so there might be some compute constraints. But if you see, Gemini 3 Flash Preview has already generated a response in 20 seconds, whereas Gemini 3.5 is still thinking. It is generating those reasoning tokens. For this test, Gemini 3.5 Flash took about a minute to generate the response. Now, there is another big difference. 3 Flash Preview generated 4,400 tokens, whereas 3.5 generated about 21,000 tokens. For 3 Flash Preview, the chain of thought is very simplistic and straightforward. It doesn't have much information, whereas the 3.5 Flash chain of thought is a lot more structured, and this kind of resembles that of Gemini 3.1 Pro Preview. It's a lot more organized, it's very step by step, and the model thinks about every step that it's going to take. Okay, so the first one is the response from the Gemini 3 Flash Preview. In this case, it starts randomly. However, it's able to actually put everything together in the exact crowd formation that we wanted. And this is actually pretty incredible, even for the Gemini 3 Flash Preview, that this model is able to do it, because most of the other models that I have tested have hard time completing this specific prompt. Now, this is the response or output from Gemini 3.5 Flash. There are two different things. One is scattered swarm, and then if you click on form text, basically it brings everybody and puts them in the text arrangement that we wanted. It also included a couple of different perspectives. So one is top view, the other one is perspective view. Very simplistic, but things actually work, which is nice. Now, in the beginning of the video, I said that this is a lot closer to Gemini 3.1 Pro than its Flash predecessor. I ran the same prompt through Pro and Flash model again. Flash took about a minute and 30 seconds. Pro took about 56 seconds. However, the biggest difference is the number of tokens. Again, Pro generated about 7,700 tokens, whereas this new 3.5 Flash generated about 22,000 tokens for the same prompt. Now, this is the output generated by a 3.1 Pro Preview. The crowd is definitely a lot more aesthetically pleasing compared to what a 3.5 Flash is able to generate, but you get very similar quality result. Now, here's another direct comparison between 3.1 Pro and 3.5 Flash. This prompt is actually a very complex prompt that requires a lot of reasoning. So we're asking it to create a voxel garden scene. Now, if you start going through the chain of thought of both the 3.1 Pro Preview and this new 3.5 Flash, you see a lot of similarity between how the chain of thought is structured. It feels like Google DeepMind used very similar recipes for training both the Pro and the new 3.5 Flash model. And that not only shows in the chain of thought, but also the type of outputs that you get from both of these models. Now, before we look at the output, one thing which I want to show again is the number of tokens that are generated. So in this case, Gemini 3.1 Pro generated about 20,000 tokens. On the other hand, it generated about 40,000 tokens. So it's definitely a lot more token hungry, and it's going to generate a lot more tokens compared to both the previous Flash and Pro versions. Now, in terms of timing, the Pro version took about 2 minutes and 23 seconds. The other one is very close to 2 minutes and 28 seconds. So the Pro is still a lot slower compared to the Flash, but the Flash generates a lot more tokens. All right, so this is the output from Pro. The mist is a bit too high, so you'll have to really zoom in order to see the structure. But it's pretty good output. Now, this is the output from 3.5 Flash. Again, I think it's a very similar quality. You can zoom out, it's a little misty. So if you zoom out too much, you won't be able to see much. This is the night mode. I think this could definitely use some work. and this is the morning rendering. Now here's another output for the same prompt for 3.5 Flash. These are probabilistic models, so you definitely want to run them a couple of times to see how good the outputs that you can get and how much these prompts are actually followed. I am pretty happy with the type of results that I'm getting out of this model. Now, in terms of web development, the output is very similar to the Pro version. Again, for this specific prompt, it took about 4,000 more tokens compared to 3.1 Flash or 3.1 Pro Preview. So this is the output from 3.1 Pro Preview, which actually follows the prompt very closely. It also implemented the dark theme, and everything seems to work nicely. Now, for the same prompt, here's the output from 3.5 Flash. Again, in terms of the output quality, it looks very similar. So they definitely used the same sort of recipe that they were using for the Pro version. Now, for this next set of prompts, I asked both the models to generate a website for the 25 first legendary Pokemon. This is the output from 3.1 Pro Preview. Now, for the exact same prompt, here's the output from 3.5 Flash. Again, you can see that there is a lot of similarity in the output. Now, given that the pricing is hopefully lower compared to Pro, you could definitely see that this will be a valuable model that could give you the 3.1 Pro level performance at reduced cost. Okay, so here's another prompt. In this case, I asked it to create a 3D visualization of LA where the user should be able to select different destination on the right hand side and should be able to have this flyover effect. The main thing was that I wanted to use open source maps and don't rely on any APIs. Okay, so here's what was the first output. Functionally, it was accurate. I think there is still some issues with the UI, but if you click on a specific destination, it really takes you there. You can change the time of the day, right? And also control this movement, right? So pretty nice. I think overall it was able to implement and follow the prompt exactly the way we wanted it to follow. Now here I asked it to implement the Linux desktop environment as a complete web operating system in a single HTML file, and it does a pretty good job at it. So here's the output. You can type the password Ubuntu to sign in, and it also has this neat sound effect that you probably heard. Now the terminal actually works surprisingly well, right? So you can basically change directory to other folders that are in there, right? And it has some files in here. I think you can also even do something like, let's say, let's call this test. And now we can see that the test directory is there. Or maybe let's try to change directory. I think that does not work. Clear works, right? So pretty good, right? It also implemented some other neat things. So for example, it shows you the CPU utilization, the memory, right? These are just made up numbers. But based on that simple prompt, it's able to generate a lot of things. So let's see, this is a test. I'm actually curious if I save changes. Let's try to open this again. It actually preserved the state. So pretty incredible. Let's go to fast.com, and yes, it seems to be able to emulate the browser as well. So it's a very strong model. Especially it's even able to change the wallpaper, which is kind of incredible. It have this software center. Okay, you can actually install things, and if we go here, it's not really loading, right? But it's a lot more comprehensive compared to anything that I have seen before, which is pretty awesome. If you're using this in AI Studio, you can set the thinking level. Now we have 4 different levels: minimal, low, medium, high. You select just the thinking level, and then I think it adaptively changes the amount of tokens that it's going to generate in its thinking budget. Also, there's a code execution, function calling. You can ground your answers in Google search, or you can provide a specific URL as a context. So let's actually try this. So I have my app for voice to text, which I'll highly recommend to check out. This is one of the fastest, completely private and local speech transcription system for macOS. Windows version is coming very soon. So we're going to just provide this as a link, and I'm going to ask it to just recreate this website inspired from Whryte theme in a single file. Now, I think it has the ability to read the content. So let's see what exactly it does. Okay, so here's what it generated, and actually it's pretty good. So this is the same animation that I have, but I would say that it's probably a better quality animation, right? Then we have very similar sections because it's able to read the data from the URL itself. So it seems like most of the data is here. Then it also included that video that I have in my own website, in also the pricing section, right? So very close in terms of overall components to the original website, but it's definitely following the Whryte theme. It also has pretty good world knowledge. So in this case, I specifically just pointed it to longitude and latitude and asked it what historic event happened here. And it's able to figure out that this was world's first successful controlled power sustained flight of a heavier than thin aircraft achieved by Wright brothers. Now, when it comes to reasoning, I want to test it on misguided attention. If you have seen some of my other videos, this basically tests the model capability of doing independent reasoning by providing a modified version of a well-known problem or paradox. And the idea is that if the LLM has the ability to do logical deduction, then it should be able to catch these modifications. Now, the first one is a modified version of the trolley problem. Now, in this case, in the initial chain of thought, it thinks that it's a classic trolley problem. However, it seems like later on, it is able to see that we were talking about 5 dead people on the track, right? And after that, the decision is very simple because it says the value of life versus respect for the deceased, right? So it's not going to pull the lever in order to save a life. I tested this on a number of other similar questions and it does seem to work well. However, it's not able to solve this specific one. So this is a modified version of the classic river crossing problem. And in here, we only want the goat to be transported across the river without being eaten. And it thinks of it as the classic river crossing problem. So instead of just taking the goat to the other side and stopping, it continues on through all the steps. So there are definitely cases in which it still suffers from misguided attention. Now, as of the recording of this video, I don't have any information about the actual pricing or the benchmarks. When they are available, I am going to include them in a later video. However, I do think based on my own testing, it's a very strong model and it does approach the performance or level of Gemini 3.1 Pro Preview, hopefully at a much reduced cost. Do let me know what your experience with this model is and what do you think how capable this model is. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.